this evening to learn something um, this evening, and I'm really honored to be back on this user group to present about Azure Arc for SQL servers. So actually, this is a new topic even for me. So while I was exploring Azure Arc for SQL servers, I thought like, why won't I just do a presentation about it so that people who are very new for the Azure Arc, especially for the SQL servers on the top of SQL servers, maybe they will learn something. So I had a hard time um, on this topic while I was trying to um, install SQL Server 2022, and I wanted to add Azure Active Directory connection to the SQL Server 2022. That's when I had so many problems. So I thought like while resolving, I thought like let me do a presentation on this one, and I thought of sharing those. So this is a fairly new topic for me as well, but I hope you will learn something today. So let's get started. Please, everybody mute yourself so that others can clearly listen to the presentation. Okay. So a little bit about me. I'm a database administrator, and um, if you do not know about me, I'm a data platform MVP, and I did my master's in computer technology here in Chicago. So in Eastern Illinois University, a couple of years ago, and also I do volunteer for the user groups. I co-organize user group, couple of user groups. Um, the user groups that you are seeing here, the Data and AI South Florida user group, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion user group, and also Data TGIF user group from Switzerland, which I do with my friend Kai Sauter. So he's my co-organizer as well. So, and then if you have any questions, and if you're not able to ask here, at DBA Nuggets is my user ID for Twitter, and down below the LinkedIn account, you can type by my name. I'm very active on LinkedIn more than Twitter, and I usually post about my upcoming webinars, the free virtual webinars or in person. I will just post it out there, and I do blog at dbanuggets.com as well. Um, I do blog about SQL Server and Azure SQL database. So if you like to visit my website and look out for the blogs. I do have an extension of this particular um, presentation as a blog post as well. You can go ahead and look at that on my website. So as an overview, like I said, like if you are not familiar with Azure Arc, this session will give you an overview of what it can do and how you can actually set it up on your to actually connect it to your SQL servers. So especially we are talking about the SQL Server, we can actually use Azure Arc and then try to connect different cloud providers to the through the Azure Arc and connect to Azure, but I'm only talking about SQL Server here. And also I'll be talking about SQL Server 2022. And if you wanted to use SQL Server 2022, but also take advantage of installing and using the Azure Active Directory, there are certain necessary steps that you need to follow so that you can use Azure Active Directory. I will also I will also be talking about that because the prerequisite to have Azure Active Directory on SQL Server 2022 is to have Azure Arc in place. So that's the reason why I'll be talking about that here as well. So what is Azure Arc Enable SQL Server? So as an overview, right? Um, if you are using Azure, and then if you use Azure portal, and if you have a couple of databases or instances in Azure, but then most of them or most of your other workloads and the servers are on-prem, or you have other cloud providers, AWS, for example. If you wanted to have that centralized location where you can, it's like a central management database, kind of like to see what is your estate, like how many servers you have, what all databases you have, and can you manage in a centralized location and see what is your infrastructure looks like and how many SQL servers you have. It's like a inventory management to take care of all the servers in one place. You can see all of your databases and what are there, the basically the properties of those databases, right? What is the compatibility level, or like whether it is online or if it is offline, or if it is read only, those sort of inventory collection. You can do it by pulling all of these SQL Server information into the Azure portal through Azure Arc. So it is called as Azure Arc enabled SQL Server. And you can also take the advantage of if you're on-prem, you do not have all the capabilities that you can take advantage, like when you are in Azure. So by having these SQL servers pulled into the Azure through Azure Arc, there you can take the advantages of, like, for example, best practice assessments and Microsoft Defender for Cloud, because you do not have these capabilities on-prem. Just just to just pulling those SQL servers onto that location through Azure Arc, you can take the you can have this advantage of using these additional features from Azure. So how does that inventory that I'm talking look like, right? It's in the graph, it's in the bar graphs and like the charts that you see here. If you can observe, you can actually see the compatibility. The first bar graph, the query one, it shows the, like, what are the compatibility level of all the databases that I have in this inventory, and like whether what all are SQL versions, and then you can see what are the database names, and you can also see the distribution of all those databases, the edition and all the necessary configuration information you can see. So let's talk a little bit about, like, as an overview, we saw like what is Azure Arc is required to pull all of those servers or other cloud providers into Azure portal to see it in the centralized location. But what is required, right, for to build this architecture? So there are three things that are needed, three agents. Azure Connected Machine Agent. This agent will actually help manage the Windows and Linux machines hosted outside of Azure. So um, uh, if you are using the Windows machine, like if you want to pull the Windows machine where your SQL servers are hosted, or the Linux machines where your servers are hosted, database servers are hosted, then if you are using those operating systems, then you need to have this Azure Connected Machine Agent. The second one is Azure extension for SQL Server, because we are trying to use the SQL servers here. So you need to have that Azure extension in place. And the third one is Azure Monitoring Agent. So to use the Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which is a cloud service, right? This is a cloud service and also the best practices assessment. Even this is a cloud service. To activate, to use these two services in Azure, after you pull those SQL servers into the Azure, you need to have this Azure Monitoring Agent. So this by enabling this agent, you can have all of the collected data, and you can actually collect the data, and then you can save the data into the analytical workspace. If you have any workspace already there, you can select that, or you can build one workspace for this purpose to save this collected data. So like I said, you need to pull up the SQL Server instances. To make these SQL servers available in Azure, you need to have these extensions, like I said, Azure Connected Machine Agent, Azure extension for SQL Server, Azure Monitoring Agent. So if you see here, first we need to add the Windows machine itself. So the SQL servers are hosted on that Windows machine, let's say. First, we need to add those Windows machines itself. And for that, we need the Azure Connected Machine Agent. That's how the that Windows machine will be Arc enabled. But then to make the SQL Server Arc enabled, you need to have the Azure extension for SQL Server. So there are certain prerequisites that are required. Um, So you need the active subscription, definitely, and you need to verify first whether the to even to even have this Arc connected machine agent, you need to check for the network requirements. There are several of them. You need to make sure that, and you need to also make sure the certain outbound rules are enabled for server, and also make sure that the port 1433 is enabled. Can everyone please mute yourself? Thank you. And also there are certain resource providers that you need to enable. These two resource providers are needed. Again, these are the prerequisites. So Microsoft Azure Arc Data and Microsoft Hybrid Compute. You need to first enable these two resource providers. So where do you find these resource providers? Again, these comes under the prerequisites. So go to your subscription, and inside your subscription you can see the resource providers under the settings, and here if you can actually search for these two resource providers that I am talking about, Azure Arc Data and Hybrid Compute. If you do not find them here, you need to search and then install and then register. You can just search them and make sure they are registered. And there are certain server service principal permissions that are required to even enable the Azure Arc. So the account that is trying to install this needs to have several permissions. If one of the permissions is not set in place, you cannot do it. Again, this is a little bit complicated process. You need to follow step by step. While I was installing, I I somehow skipped some of these steps, and at the end of the process, I had several issues. So you need to really follow. If you have this PDF, I can share these slides with you because I put everything that is required here, so it will be useful. So that account that is trying to install the Azure Arc need these permissions. It should have read permissions to the subscription itself, and permissions to the Azure resource group, and all of these that are mentioned here. It requires those permission, and it also needs, like, if there are two ways that you can actually install the Azure Arc. You can automatically um, install it, or you can manually install step by step. So if you're manually installing it, there should be the administrative permissions on the machine itself. And at scale, you can also do this at scale. Like if you have several SQL servers that you wanted to install Azure Arc and pull them into the Azure portal, right, to make the inventory, then you need user access administrator role. Again, all of these permissions, right? You need these permissions if you are doing it at the scale. Again, these are required at the subscription level. Some are required at the resource level, like the administrative permissions at the resource level as well. So we are mainly focusing on like SQL Server 2022. So we are basically, because I'm taking this 2022 as an example, because we can also install Azure Active Directory, and having Azure Arc enabled SQL Server is a prerequisite um, to use Azure Active Directory. So while I was installing, right, I took the screenshots where I have faced an issue. So basically, if you are using graphical user interface while installing SQL Server 2022, you can just select the all the instant features you want, along with SQL Server extension for Azure. You remember we need this. This is as a prerequisite, one of the agent. This is one of the agent to enable the Azure Arc. So click on that SQL Server extension for Azure. And then while you go through the graphical user interface through next steps, it will ask you to enable this Azure extension for SQL Server. You need to provide all of this information, like what principal ID you wanted to use, and what is the password, subscription ID and resource group, which region, and what is the tenant ID. Again, this is like too much information you need to provide to move ahead with that. So I have provided all of the details, but while moving ahead, right, by clicking next, I have seen this issue. There were validation errors. I made sure I did like this one at least 30 times, but I still saw this issue. There were validation errors and it didn't provide me much information, right? So what I did was like, I don't want to use graphical user interface, but let me do it manually. So what I did was like, you can use that using graphical user interface, or you can do it manually by yourself without clicking that Azure extension. Just install normally, just to install the database engine services or any other features, but do not select that option like I mentioned here. You do not have to select that option, SQL Server extension for Azure. But instead, what I did was like once I installed SQL Server, I went to the Azure portal and I searched for Azure Arc SQL and I clicked on SQL Server Azure Arc. Once you click on that, you can actually register and connect your SQL Server to Azure Arc. There are two options here. I clicked on the first one. So if you read that, connect SQL Server to Azure Arc, underneath that, manage your SQL Server instances hosted outside of Azure with the connected machine agent and the SQL Arc extension. Do you remember we mentioned like we require these agents for installing the Azure Arc for SQL Server. So click on Connect Servers, and there you have all of these prerequisites that you can follow, you can read. But I would like to go to the next, and it will ask you for all the details, like just if you are installing any resource, you need to generally provide the resource group, subscription name, and which region you want to install, what is the operating system, and under the license type, click on the license type you have. Like I have a production environment on the server with enterprise. So that is my license type. So I clicked on that and I went to the next. So once I click on next, it will automatically it will ask for any tags. So tags are basically useful um, at the subscription level if you want to see, hey, what is the cost of this particular resource? So you can easily identify the cost for your resources. If you can tag those, it is easy to identify. That is the advantage of having tags, naming the tags, right? Naming the resources and giving those values. So by clicking next, it will actually give me a script itself where I can actually download. So it will give you the clear instructions on how to download and how to run the script. Like if you can read it here, it will give you um, all the details of how you can actually download. And there is also a download button over there, or you can just copy the entire code. What I did was like I just copied, or you can also download. So once I do that, for Windows only, you can actually run that PowerShell script that you just copied directly on your Windows machine where your SQL Server is hosted, right? So I downloaded that script, but then while you are running that script, it will ask you to sign into the Azure portal. Like while it was installing, it will ask you to connect to your Azure, and also you need to have permissions for that account to run that particular PowerShell code. So I did not have that permission. It threw me an error. So I executed in the same PowerShell in the same command prompt. I executed this get execution policy scope current user. So I'm actually giving it the permissions to run that particular PowerShell script. So after giving this particular, after running this code, it gave me the permission so I can execute that PowerShell script. So all I did was once I gave that I gave that permissions to that account using that particular code execution policy. I have just pasted that code here and I pressed enter. And if you see here, all it was doing is clearly it first asked me to sign in, use the web browser to open the page. And if you see there, it will ask you to do the device login. So you will go through that page and then you'll give the ID and password. Then it will show you authentication successful. And after that, it will start installing all of the Azure connected machine agent, and then it will also register your Windows machine, and then it will also install the Azure extension for SQL Server. It will clearly show you the status of where it is, and you do not have to write any code. It's just copy and then paste on your Windows machine where your SQL Server is hosted. So it will first register your Windows machine itself, and then it will add the Azure extension for SQL Server automatically. So if you are using the graphical user interface and click that button, it should do everything by itself. You do not have to worry about all of these additional steps. But as you see, I got that error and I went through the documentation, Microsoft documentation to figure out how I can do it by myself. So, so once I completed that script, I can close that window and I can come to the Azure portal and I can open up the Azure Arc for SQL servers. And there it is, I can see the Windows machine. The first one shows the Windows machine itself, and the second one is the SQL Server instance name. Both of them will be shown here. And if you see the location and the which resource group they are under and the status is connected, all of that information is shown. Now, if I want to see more about like what's in my SQL Server, this is all in the Azure portal, right? So I'm clicking on that SQL Server, and right side I can see all the databases. And if you see, these are the on-prem databases, right? But still I can see the inventory and the database name, including the system databases. I can see the status, whether they are online, what is the creation time, and you can actually see more details into it. And all these details will be shown under the data management under the databases. So like that, you can actually install all of your SQL Server starting from SQL Server 2008. If you have SQL Server 2008, even that you can actually add by using Azure Arc. So let's talk about the SQL Server 2022, which I'm trying to add Azure Active Directory, and the prerequisite is to have Azure Arc in place. This is a little bit not like the other ones that we have seen, just adding those SQL servers onto the by using the Azure Arc extension. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So let's go through step by step on how to do it. So SQL Server should be connected to the Azure cloud through Azure Arc. There is no other way. If you want to use Azure Active Directory, you need to have Azure Arc. So there are certain prerequisites here. So what are the prerequisites that you need, right? You can either rely on Microsoft to do this process automatically behind the scenes while you still select a couple of options, but you can also manually do it by yourself. Two options. Here, first we will see how to actually do it automatically. and then let's see how to do it manually. So the prerequisites are we need to have a certificate. That certificate needs to be saved inside the key vault. If you do not have a key vault, it is very easy to have an account, build a key vault, especially for this service. It's easy to have that key vault, but then that certificate needs to be saved inside that key vault. And then while you are doing couple of clicks, the Azure Active Directory application will be created automatically. This application is really useful. It will be generated automatically. So the first step is to set up Azure Active Directory admin. So if you wanted to use Azure Active Directory and then create the different Azure Active Directory logins onto your SQL Server 2022, you need to have an admin, right? So we need to first set up an account for the Azure Active Directory as an admin. So what are the permissions needed, right, for that account to actually use this key vault and then build this application that is required? Actually, you need to have the contributor role for the key vault. That particular account need to have the contributor role for the key vault, and for the SQL and for the server, as well as from the Azure Arc. So if you see these screenshots, the first screenshot shows the key vault. So I am using Deepthi at dbnuggets.com as my Azure Active Directory admin that is having key vault contributor role. And the second screenshot shows the SQL Server itself. SQL Server Azure Arc. Underneath the SQL Server Azure Arc, that particular Deepthi at dbnuggets.com have a contributor role at the resource group level. And at the key vault, underneath the key vault, you need to set up the access policies under the key vault. These access policies are required for that particular account, which we plan to make it as AD admin account. So all you need to do is go to the key vault that you built, and underneath the access policies, you need to give all of these select, get, list, and under the secret permissions, certificate permissions, all of this just give as it is. You do not have to give all the permissions, just give the only required permissions. Click next. And also it requires this, I'm giving the Deepthi account all of these permissions. So access policies under Azure AD users. Again, I put all the screenshots here, what all permissions are required. Again, this is under the key vault. Review changes, again, all the permissions. And here, while saving, it will check for the principal name. Again, Deepthi is the account that I'm giving the permissions. I'm clicking on save. Now I will go to the Azure Arc services again. Click on the Azure Arc. Now I'll go to the Azure Active Directory. Underneath the Azure Active Directory, now I have given all the permissions that the account needs to make this operation successful, right? That account need to be the admin. So what I'm doing is I went to the Azure Arc, and underneath the Azure Active Directory, I have given the admin login deepthi at dbnuggets.com. And here, as we are doing this process automatically, we are relying on the Microsoft to create the certificate, to create the application for us automatically. So all I have to do is I need to select the service managed cert. There are two options here. Again, this is under the Azure Arc, underneath the Azure Active Directory. So we are giving this particular account to select the service managed cert, not the customer managed cert. If we choose the customer managed cert, we need to we need to build the cert by ourselves. So I am relying on Microsoft. So I'll click on service managed cert, and then under the SQL Server application registration. I'm so sorry, I'm blowing your ears. So underneath the app registration, Again, I'm choosing the service manage apps registration, right? Underneath the app, certification and application both are required. So I'll click on that service managed, and then I will also choose the key vault, which key vault you want to place this in. So I'm choosing the key vault, and then I will click on select because I'm creating this certificate and the certificate needs to be saved in the key vault. If you see, it is also checking where you want to save this. Um, Underneath the certificate, if you see the key vault, it is asking. So if, by clicking on change key vault, it will give you the option to choose the key vault. So click on the key vault and then click on select. So once you select that, right, it will automatically give that deepthi@dbnuggets.com, any account that you are choosing, it will actually give that the admin permissions, and it will also behind the scenes, it will create the certificates by itself in the format of the host name, instance name, and a unique number. Our host name is my host name, the desktop SVC, SV5T, something like that. And then my instance name, my SQL Server instance name, which is SQL 2022, and a unique number, right? This is the certificate it will generate automatically. And then it will also create Azure Active Directory application automatically in the format, in the similar format, host name, instance name, and a unique number. And the necessary permissions also will be granted to this application automatically, right? Everything happens behind the scenes. That account will also have all the necessary permissions it needs to access the certificate and to access the application. But remember, the certificate created automatically is not managed and rotated by Microsoft. It is up to the customer to manage the certificate. So install Azure Active Directory to connect to the SQL Server. Here are a couple of steps that are needed. Again, I believe now we are going to the manual process of how to do it by ourselves. If you wanted to do the custom design certificate and then the application. So the first thing that is required is create and register the Azure Active Directory application and also grant permissions to that Azure Active Directory uh, application. Previously, it happened automatically. All the permissions that are required for that application are automatically given. But since we are doing it manually here, we need to take care of all of these things, right? And then you need to create and assign a certificate, configure Azure Active Directory authentication for SQL Server through the Azure portal, and then go ahead and create the logins and users and connect with a supported authentication method. That's the last step of like how you can connect from your on-prem to Azure. So this from here, we are seeing how to do this manually, right? The first step is to create and register Azure Active Directory application. Go to the Azure Active Directory on your portal, Azure portal. Click on Azure Active Directory. Now you need to register your application, right? Go to the app registration underneath the Azure Active Directory. Click on New Registration. There you will register your application, where you will give the um, name, name for this application, and supported account types. Choose the um, choose the account types that you can choose the who can use this application or access this API, right? If you are having, I choose the default single tenant, default directory only single tenant, but it is up to you, like depending upon your requirement, you can choose that. And then I just clicked on register. So after I register, this is the application that I registered, SQL Server CTP1, right? That is the name I have given here. So while once I created that application, I should also give the necessary permissions to that particular account because we are doing this manually, right? Now go to the API permissions underneath that application, and then go to the Microsoft APIs. And there you need to give certain Microsoft Graph permissions. So click on that Microsoft Graph, and then underneath the Microsoft Graph, you have application permission and delegated permissions. So click on application permissions, and there you need to give certain read permissions. So search, if you do not find it, directory.read.all, which will um, pop up from the directory where you can select that and give the add permissions. And then go to the same registered application. Again, underneath the API permissions, again, click on the add permissions. Now, this time, previously we have given the application permissions, but this time now you need to click on the Microsoft Graph, but then give the delegated permissions. Underneath the delegated permissions, these are all the permissions that are required for that particular account, right? Give all of the permissions, easy, just select them, and then once those permissions are given, then you will go ahead and create and assign the certificate. The first thing that we did was to register the application manually and then give the necessary permissions to that account. Now we'll go ahead and create and assign the certificate. Now, if you do not have a key vault, you can create the key vault, and then underneath the key vault, you go to the certificates. Now we are going to create the certificate. Now I put everything as it is. I did not mess around with anything. I just all of them, like all the certificate type, like self-assigned, self-signed certificate, and um, all of them were automatically popped up for the certificate. So I did not change anything here. And then I clicked on create. Once you click on create, it will give you an option to download that particular certificate in CER format. Now you need to download this certificate because you need to upload this certificate um, underneath that application that you have just registered, right? The first screenshot shows how to download it, but the second screenshot shows it will take you to the application that you just registered. And underneath that application, you go to the certificate and secret blade because we have to link the certificate that we created to the application that we created, right? So we are manually doing this. When we did this automatically, the certificate is created and it is linked up to the application that we registered automatically. But here we are doing it manually. Everything is up to us, right? So we created the certificate, we created the application. Now we need to link these two. So I downloaded the certificate. Now I went to the registration, application registration, go to the certificates and secret um, that that blade, and then click on that, and then underneath the certificate, it will give you an option to upload that certificate. As you downloaded it in the CER format, it should accept the same format. So you will just click on upload certificate and you will upload the same downloaded certificate over here. And then while you are uploading, it will show you like upload a certificate with one of these formats, which is the same format. All I did was I clicked on that folder and then I uploaded that, which will automatically populate that information. Click on add. Now you have actually linked up your certificate to your application. That part is done. Now we'll go into the key vault again, where you have saved your certificate, and you need to go to the access policies. Again, we are doing this manually, right? The similar permissions, you remember, where we have given that account the necessary permissions to the key vault. The same you have to do it here. Even for the automated process, this process is necessary to do it manually. So you'll go ahead and give all these permissions. Click on next, and here underneath the principal, you need to select the Windows Server itself. And you see that Windows Server itself, like desktop dash, that is my Windows Server account. So that is automatically created here. All I have to do is search by that server name. So I will find that and click on next. And now I'll go to the server, the Azure Arc, and then underneath the Active Directory. Now I will go ahead and do the custom managed cert. Previously, we did the service managed cert, but now we are doing it the customer managed cert. Click on the change certificate and upload the same certificate. You will be able to find it because you just created this certificate. You can do that. And then click on app registration type. Again, right now we are doing customer managed application registration. And then choose the application registration that you just registered, and then set this particular account, again deepthi@dbanuggets.com. I want to use that as a admin login, where I'll click on set admin, which will become an admin account um, to actually create any additional Azure Active Directory logins onto SQL Server 2022. So I will actually set this as an admin, right? And it will show you all the information, the key vault information that you have to choose, certificate, and the version is automatically popped up. Click on select, and this is again showing like how we actually select the application that we have actually built. So once I click on that change application registration, it will clearly show you the app that is registered for your SQL Server 2022 that is being populated over there. So click on that and click on select, and then click on save. If you skipped any of the steps, it will throw an error here, and it will take several minutes to save this option, right? You should not refresh. You need to wait for a while for it to save. I had an issue here several times before I had a success because I skipped some of the steps, like the permissions here and there, one or two permissions I skipped, and it didn't work. It failed, and didn't give me proper error details as well. So I had to go back and do it all over again. So be patient at this particular step because it will take some time to set that account as an admin and stuff. So it finally was successful. Now what I will do is we registered everything, right? The prerequisite was to have that registration. We need to have that application registered, and we need to save the certificate, create and save the certificate, and give the necessary permissions to that admin account, and then save, right? So once I'm done with that, what I will do is I'll go to the local management studio of my SQL Server. I'll connect to the, again, I'm connecting locally, right? I connected to that. And now what I will do is, because I have given the Deepthi@dbanuggets.com the admin permissions, this particular account should automatically show up under the logins, because you remember we have given that as a admin account, um, Active Directory admin account permissions. It should automatically popped up. Now, since it is automatically popped up, I can I can change that as a sysadmin role as well. So alter server role, sysadmin, add member, deepthi@dbanuggets.com. I can give that as a sysadmin account, like permissions. And you can go ahead and start creating the logins right now. Any other Azure Active Directory logins, just go ahead and create the login in this particular format. Create login, that login name, email address, let's say from external provider, go. That is like that is a login creation for Azure Active Directory user, but you can also give it to a group, login creation for Azure Active Directory group, by following that create login group name from external provider again. And also you can give login creation for Azure AD application as well. Create login application name from external provider. Now what I can do is I can try connecting to that to Azure Active Directory, like from to Azure. I want to connect to the Azure from my local management studio. So how do I do that? Since we have Azure Active Directory enabled now currently, click on your server name, and then in the underneath the authentication type, you can choose Azure Active Directory Universal with multi-factor authentication. And since you select that and you have given your username, deepthi@dbanuggets.com currently. So once I click on connect, it will ask me the multi-factor authentication, like the code and stuff, by using the authentication app, I have given the access. So once I click on connect, it should be able to connect by using my Azure Active Directory login, like you see on the screen right side, right? So that's how you can actually enable Azure Active Directory for your SQL Server 2022. Again, you need to be very careful at each and every step. I thought of putting this together because I had a hard time while figuring out what was the issue, because the failure didn't give me proper details. So I thought of like putting this together. So what we have learned so far is we have known what is Azure Arc. It is nothing but you can actually look at your resources, um, all the infrastructure together. So as you have everything together, you can actually create the policies on multiple servers together. And if you are pulling your old servers to your Azure, like by using the Azure Arc, you can also get that extended security updates for the older versions of SQL Server. And you can also use like a monitoring and like best practices assessments and other advantages that you have in Azure. You can also take that advantage. And especially we have seen how to activate Azure Active Directory, because Azure Arc is the prerequisite to even have Active Directory on SQL Server 2022. Previously, we do not have that option. Before SQL Server 2022, we do not have that option to enable Azure Active Directory, but here we do. So these are the references that I actually follow to enable Azure Arc for the SQL Server. If you want to go in detail and in depth, you can please follow these resources. And I would like to thank you for attending this session today. And thank you, Michael, for giving me um, this wonderful opportunity to share my learnings. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepthi. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.